Hello, my name is Chris Clark and I'm an Extension Beef Specialist with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, and I'm here today to talk with you about the Veterinary Feed Directive. Effective January 1st, 2017, the FDA implemented some pretty major rule changes regarding how we use antibiotics in livestock feeds. The goals are kind of listed there on the slide, to reduce antibiotic use, to increase veterinary oversight, and to limit uses to those necessary for animal health. It's important to note the focus is really on medically important antibiotics, which are the ones that we use in human medicine. And there's an underlying premise that's pretty important, that the use of antibiotics contributes to the development of resistant pathogens. There's 3 dispensing statuses in veterinary medicine. Over-the-counter drugs are available to producers without veterinary oversight. They can be purchased at co-ops and farm supply stores and vet clinics and stuff like that without a prescription. Prescription drugs are just like the classic prescription drugs in human medicine. They require a written prescription from the veterinarian, and often we just purchase these actually from the vet clinic. And then veterinary feed directive status would be similar to prescription, but that's for feed additive antibiotics and just for veterinary medicine. Prescription and veterinary feed directive statuses are very, very similar, and we'll touch on that just a little more later. This is just a sample of a medication label. This is a generic chlorotetracycline label, and it kind of shows some of the changes that we've seen in the labels. One of the big things with this rule change is that production uses of the medicines have been removed from the labels. So you can see the highlighted label indications here for increased rate of body weight gain and improved feed efficiency. Those label indications have been removed completely from the labels, and that was done kind of in cooperation with the FDA and the drug sponsors, and they've cooperated on that to get that done before January 1st, 2017. So that's a big deal because extra label use of feed additive antibiotics is illegal. In some instances with prescription drugs, we have the flexibility and some provisions that allow us to use those drugs in an extra label manner. We don't have that flexibility, we don't have those provisions for feed additives. So when it comes to indication, dose, duration, how to administer the drugs, etc., we really have to follow those label directions pretty precisely. So historically we've had a lot of antibiotics available that were medically important. They were available as over-the-counter drugs for use in the feed and water. And what's happened is those medically important antibiotics to be used in or on the feed have become veterinary feed directive drugs, and the medically important antibiotics to be administered in the water have become prescription drugs. Again, from a producer standpoint, the veterinary feed directive and a prescription are very, very similar. They're functionally the same thing. In terms of regulation and in terms of the veterinary side of things, there are a few differences. But for producers, they're basically the same thing. There's 3 parties involved, the veterinarian, the producer, and the distributor. And those 3 parties have to work together. We've really strived to help them all understand their roles and responsibilities and how they must work together to kind of make this thing work. And then for a veterinary feed directive or for a prescription, you have to have a valid veterinary client-patient relationship, or a VCPR. That's kind of defined here on this slide. I know it's a lot of words. This is directly taken from the Iowa Code if you do want to look at it closely, but the little cartoon picture at the bottom probably summarizes it almost as well as the words. You really just need a working relationship between the veterinarian and the client, and then the veterinarian has to be familiar with the livestock through physical exams and farm visits and things like that. So the take-home message is that a veterinary feed directive is required to get and use antibiotics that are delivered in the feed, and to get and use antibiotics that are put into pre-manufactured products like bagged feeds, mineral blocks, milk replacers, and those sorts of things. A prescription then would be required to obtain and use antibiotics to be delivered in the water. So that sounds pretty simple, but there are some challenges. Whether veterinarians choose to use a paper VFD process or an electronic VFD process, there's certainly a learning curve. There are some logistics and some details to figure out. And then the production pictures on this slide really just represent some challenges in the beef industry, some very specific production practices that present some controversy or some gray areas, and we kind of have to work through those. My focus is more on the beef industry, so those are the examples that I used, but each livestock industry would have their own sets of unique production practices to think about. And finally, here's some resources for you. The Iowa Beef Center has a nice Veterinary Feed Directive information and resource page. Basically is a page that links out to lots and lots of other sites with information on the VFD, including the actual FDA web pages. And then the Iowa Pork Industry Center has a very similar link from their diseases and health section. Additionally, you can feel free to contact me for more information or your extension veterinarians, Grant Duell, Chris Rodemaker, and Yuko Sato. Thank you very much for your time.